point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works. Greed clarifies, cuts through, and captures the essence of the evolutionary spirit.
Well, welcome to church. An older movie from the 80s, perhaps you remember it. But do you think Michael Douglas's character is right? Does greed work? Does it clarify? Is it good? And if so, how many of you teach greed as a value to your children? And my guess would be none of you. Right? I think there's something in us. We all sort of intuitively push back when we hear speeches on the glory of greed, right? There's something inside of us that knows that greed is unhealthy, dark, even sinister. But for how many of us would maybe intellectually disagree with the concept of greed, right? I think we're all there. Like, yeah, no, greed's not great. I wonder, though, how many of us sort of knowingly or probably unknowingly sort of participate in this race to get more. How many of us have lost sleep because we feel like we don't have enough? How many of us would declare that our version of God, the God that we believe in, gives abundantly? But we live our lives like we never have enough. And if you don't believe me, just go back and look at the toilet paper aisle from March of 2020. And please hear me, I'm not pointing the finger at all. Rather, just wanting to highlight, I think, something that's almost impossible for us to escape. And it's the influence of our culture's God of greed on our lives. So much so that it doesn't feel greedy anymore. And largely it's because our Western culture sort of indoctrinates us from childhood into the ideology of greed, which in turn feeds our economy, which depends on the creation of insatiable consumer demand from the likes of you and I, which ultimately leads to, not always, but often, to unpayable debt and garages and storage units filled with stuff that we don't need. I think greed whispers, you need more. And so we go to our temple of choice to worship, be it online, Amazon.com, or any number of online clothing salespeople my 14-year-old daughter has discovered. Or we go to an in-person temple, Target, Costco, and the likes. And we worship at the altar of more. And it's interesting. I think Jesus seems to have known our capacity to be lulled into the doctrine of greed. Because as we read the biographies that we have of Jesus' life, we discover something that's really pretty fascinating, especially when we consider what it is we like to talk about today. See, Jesus talked a lot more about money than he ever talked about things like heaven. Right? And today we love talking about heaven and who gets to go there and who doesn't. But we get super uncomfortable when people like me stand on a stage and start talking about money. Jesus told 38 stories in his life, at least 38 recorded stories, that kind of talk about here's how to operate, and here's how the world works when God's in charge, right? If everything was as it should be, here's how the world should work. He told 38 stories to kind of help illustrate that. And of those 38, 16 of them were about your money, your wealth, your possessions. And when Jesus talked about our unhealthy relationship with greed and wealth and possession, he called it the worship of mammon. And today it still dominates our culture today. And what I find particularly nauseating, and maybe this is just an aside, is how many sort of Christian leaders, people like me, love to cash in on our society's unhealthy obsession with money by baptizing, I think, the gaining of wealth in distorted doctrines that often today get called the prosperity gospel. If you give to God today, God will return back to you tenfold. No, he won't. It's why around here, when we talk about money and generosity and giving and all of that, we like to start with, when you practice generosity, you will in fact be better, but you will also be poorer. I think it's a sad day when some leaders enlist Jesus to serve our worship of greed. And honestly, we can go all the way back to the 16th century. There was a man named Johann Tetzel, and he was the guy that introduced and made up the doctrine of indulgences, which is where you give the church money and then the priest forgives your sins. That was clever. Fast forward 500 years, today's televangelists selling things like salvation, healing, and of course, wealth. Here's my point. It can be very easy to lose our way when it comes to money. I love how the theologian Richard Foster talks about it. Here's what Foster said. He said, the lust for affluence in contemporary society is psychotic. It's time we awaken to the fact that conformity to a sick society is to be sick. For Foster, there is a virus that has infected us that is not COVID-19, but greed. And so the question then we have to ask is, what's the vaccine? What's the antidote to this illness? Well, practicing generosity. If greed is the illness, generosity is the antidote. You know, there was an interesting study from the University of Zurich in Switzerland. Researchers, they grabbed 50 people and they said, listen, we're going to give you $100 a week over the next few weeks, a bit of a stimulus package, if you will. And they asked 25 of the 50 to spend every $100 every week on themselves. And then they asked the other 25 to only spend that $100 a week on other people. See, what the researchers wanted to know was they wanted to see if simply pledging to be generous was enough to make people happier. And so before they started giving the money, and before anybody spent money on themselves or spent money on other people, they hooked these study participants up to an fMRI machine, and they wanted to see if just kind of deciding I was going to spend $100 a week on myself or $100 a week on someone else, if that impacted the different parts of your brains that dealt with behavior and generosity and decision-making and happiness in particular. And here's what they discovered about generosity. They discovered that just deciding to be generous was in fact a game changer in your lives. That what these researchers discovered is that when people, the 25 that they just said, listen, I want you to decide you're going to give $100, every $100 we give you for the next few weeks away and spend it on somebody else, if you'll just decide to be generous. What they discovered is it lit up the parts of our brains associated with being happy. Similar studies have shown that practicing generosity leads to better health. In fact, practicing generosity has shown, at least, to be effective in lowering your blood pressure as much, if not more, as medication and exercise. Now, this shouldn't, of course, be a surprise to any of us because generosity is what makes us humans stay alive, right? I mean, humans are inherently social species. We've survived and thrived over the years because we take care of one another. Greed, we could say, is in fact anti-human. Greed is a catalyst for our own dehumanization. Greed is destructive, but generosity, on the other hand, it's literally a survival instinct, even a simple act of sharing food or shelter with another person, right? I mean, this is an example of humanity's sort of intrinsic generosity. If we had been an inherently selfish species, humans would have gone extinct a long time ago. But by giving to one another, we've actually prolonged the survival of the human community. Now, of course, Jesus did not have fMRI machines. However, he was able to make some rather stunning observations regarding greed and its destructive behavior in our lives and how it can dehumanize us. In fact, here's how Jesus talked about money. At least one place he talked about money. It's recorded by a historian named Luke, and he says, Jesus said this, "Be on your guard against all kinds of greed," as though there's more than one kind. "For one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Jesus, I think, seems to have known what modern science is just now discovering. Life isn't found in collecting wealth. In fact, he suggests we should actually protect ourselves from greed because of its destructive force in our lives, its tendency to keep us from becoming the best version of ourselves, and really the best version of ourselves, the collective, this extended spiritual family we call neighborhood. I mean, maybe we could just talk about it by saying things like this. Money can add meaning to your life, but money is not the meaning of our life. I mean, money's a means. I mean, sure, it can add meaning, and it is a means. But money is never to be the end, otherwise we're at risk of worshiping again what Jesus called mammon, or our stuff, our wealth, our possession. And here's the thing, this isn't like a Christian idea. This is just a really good idea. So if you're here and you're not a Jesus person, I would just say, give this a try if you'd like to have a meaningful life. And I think we all do. I think we all sort of wake up and we want our lives to matter. I think we want our lives to have impact beyond ourselves. And if you want that to be true, it needs to sort of be true in all areas of our lives, including money. Right? We make our money meaningful, and we make our lives meaningful when our money becomes a means to an end and not the end. And when our money becomes a means to an end and not the end, we begin to view all of our resources, we begin to view our net worth, we begin to view everything simply as a tool. And this is exactly, and we shouldn't be surprised by it, what Jesus taught about money in those 16 stories of the 38 that he told about your stuff, your wealth, your possessions. He again went back to this idea that your stuff, your wealth, your money is a tool. He told all kinds of stories, and I just want to tell you one of the stories. I'm just going to walk through the story Jesus told and make some comments and see where we land. You know where this is going, right? You know that I have a salsa bowl that I'm going to bribe you with at the end of this thing, right? But I want to show you what Jesus said about money because I think it's fascinating. And the story I'm about to read you is absolutely insane. It's one of the weirdest stories Jesus ever taught. And again, that historian Luke records it in chapter 16 of his biography of Jesus' life. And here's how Jesus started. There was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. Now, in the first century, it was somewhat common for rich people, business people, to sort of do business through slaves and servants. And it was actually quite difficult in the first century to sort of keep track of where everything was going and who was doing what and who had what and where all the resources, where they were. So this is kind of what Jesus is getting at, but he continues the story. So he called him in, this manager of his that was not being very responsible, and asked him, "What is this I hear about you? I want you to give an account of your management because you cannot be manager any longer." He's firing him, right? Hey, you've kind of not done very well. You've been dishonest about this thing. You've been irresponsible. There's too many loose ends out there. I don't really know what I have or who has my stuff or what's going on. You've not been honest about things. So he says, "I'm going to call you in. I need you to wrap it up, close the books, bring me the reports because you're fired." Jesus continues the story. The manager said to himself, "As you might. Well, what shall I do now? My master's taking away my job, and I'm not strong enough to dig. There's no way I'm doing manual labor." and I'm ashamed to beg. So this money manager had a little bit of time and a little bit of opportunity to figure out what he was going to do next. He still had some leverage, and then it dawns on him what he's going to do. And here's the story. I know what I'll do, so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. So he called each one of his master's debtors, and he asked the first, "How much do you owe my master?" "Well, I owe him 900 gallons of oil," he replied. Story continues. The manager told him, "Well, that's fine, but go ahead, take your bill, sit down, quickly make it 450. If your money manager was doing that with your money, how would you respond? But I suppose he's already fired. What does he have to lose? Then he asked the second, "How much do you owe?" "Well, I owe 1,000 bushels of wheat," he replied. He told him, "Go ahead, take your bill and make it 800, to which I would say, how come I didn't get the same deal as the first guy? That's better, right? Listen, I mean, the point is that the two guys are thinking, hey, right? I mean, hey, it's kind of an I scratch your back, you scratch my back kind of a situation. Hey, I'm cutting your bill in half. I'm cutting your bill by 25%, right? I mean, so just remember me when I'm unemployed, right? And for sure, he's thinking, I'm going to help you out, so when I'm unemployed, you'll help me out. Hey, let me know how I can help you in the future. And then the money manager is going to say, I'm going to take you up on that offer. And how do you think the people in the crowd hearing Jesus tell this story are responding? I mean, they're thinking, okay, the rich guy, the boss, I mean, he's going to be furious when he finds this out. He's going to string this guy up. Back in the first century, they had debtor's prison. He's going to put him in debtor's prison. He's going to have to rot there until he can pay the guy back. I mean, he's managing this rich guy's money. I mean, how dare you mismanage what isn't even yours? And I have to believe at this point, Jesus is kind of smiling because he probably knows what everyone was thinking back then and today. But here's where the twist in the story comes, because here's how Jesus says the master responds. Instead of stringing him up and throwing him into debtor's prison, the master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. Wait, what? Why? Why is he being commended? Jesus, your story's garbage, right? But listen, he had a little bit of time and a little bit of opportunity, and he used it to his advantage. And the people listening to the story would have been dumbfounded, right? The rich guy, how are you commending the dishonesty? But Jesus says, no, the manager doesn't do that. The manager sort of taps the dishonest manager on the shoulder and says, you know what? You're smarter than I thought. You've secured your future at my expense. Well done. Well done. But the story's not over. Now Jesus has everybody's attention. I mean, they just thought, well, we know where this story's going, but it didn't go that way. There's a twist in the story. And Jesus is about to tell you why, and in his answer, I think Jesus gives us a glimpse into how God views every single one of your dollars and my dollars. Every single possession that we call our own. Here's what Jesus says first, which I find unhelpful. Here's what Jesus says. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. Again, Jesus, can we just get to the point? What are you talking about? But I think Jesus, this is a weird phrase, but I think what he's getting at is he says, listen, for the people who think all there is to this life is this life, to the people that think once you die, that's it. To the people who think there's nothing beyond this life, and I mean, you may be one of those here today. Jesus is saying, well, to you, you're a lot more shrewd. You're a better planner than the people who believe there is life after this life. Jesus continues. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves so that when it's gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Okay, this is where Jesus really starts to get weird. Here's what I think Jesus is saying. I think he's saying, I want you to use your wealth. I want you to use your possessions in such a way that when you die, when this life is over, when you step into eternity, there will be people there who will welcome you because of what you did with what you had. Jesus says, I want you to use your worldly wealth, your stuff, your net worth, your whatever. I want you to use it in such a way that when you die and step into eternity, there is a group of people there who will say, thank you. Because of the way you used what you had, it changed my life. The takeaway, and don't miss it, Jesus sees your money as a tool. I think it's very normal for us to ask the question when it comes to our money, what will I have to show for it? I think Jesus is asking us to ask a better question. Who will you have to show for it? And can I just take a minute and say thank you to each of you that already know this? I don't know if you know this about what's gone on in the American church landscape over the last 18 months. There are a lot of churches, good churches, great people, who didn't get this idea, and those churches are now closed through the pandemic. They didn't make it. They didn't survive. But because there's a whole lot of you who, even when we weren't meeting, even when we were literally offering you nothing except something online, even when these beautiful brand new kids' buildings that we had built had become the most expensive storage units in Visalia, and they were just filled with stuff, and when all these chairs, when this was just an empty room for months, there's a whole lot of you who understand this principle, that Jesus sees your stuff as a tool. And because there's a whole lot of you that did that, Neighborhood didn't just survive the pandemic, we thrived through the pandemic. And I just want to say thank you. And let's give those people a hand. The reason we are able to do this is that so many of you understand that how we take our temporary here today, gone tomorrow money and turn it into something that impacts lives, that's why we're here. That's why we're still able to influence our community. I mean, I'm just so grateful for those of you. And it wasn't just your cash. I mean, so many of you saw your cars and your pools and your backyards as tools. When our student ministry couldn't meet here, they were meeting in your backyards and swimming in your pools. It's because so many of you already understand this point. In some ways, for a lot of you, I am preaching to the choir. And please hear me, I'm not, my tone this morning, I hope you're not hearing, you better step up or you're going to hell. Not at all. I just want you to hear. Remember, in this series Reset, we're just asking these two questions. How can I help and how can I grow? And we've said that the answer to those two questions are one and the same, that there are these things we can do that are catalysts so that we unlock our collective potential, and at the same time, those practices unlock our own individual potential. And understanding, and one of those practices is just understanding that Jesus sees your stuff as a tool. And he's inviting us really to move from asking, what do I have to show for it, to who will I have to show for it? And it's not just people who have a lot, right? It's people who have a little. It's people who have just a little bit in the middle, right? It's not about how much, it's about how you see it. That Jesus is saying, listen, you can take your something and turn it into something else that impacts a person's life. And so we should be asking, well, what do I have? And that number is different for all of us. And how can we use it? What do I have, and how can I use it? As a tool. But Jesus isn't finished with the story. He's got more to say. It's a little bit of a crazy story. Jesus said this: whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you've not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you've not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? So he says something here that I think is important for us to figure out. He kind of says, listen, there's this worldly wealth stuff that we think's a tool, but there's also this true riches stuff. What's that all about? I think Jesus is saying your money's, your possessions, your wealth, it's not just a tool. It's a test. It's a test. We've all been given a little bit, and I think God is watching to see what we'll do with our little bit that he's actually put on loan to us. It's not even ours to begin with. We leave it here. We manage, some of you are very good managers of stuff. But at the end of the day, you're just collecting stuff. And you'll die, and your kids will go through your house, and they'll be like, why? Now we have to rent one of these dumpsters and throw all of this stuff away. Right? How we manage what we assume. Here, this is important. I think how we manage what we assume is ours, how we manage what we assume is ours, reflects our devotion to the one whom it actually belongs. How we manage what we assume is ours reflects our devotion to the one whom it actually belongs. Now, if you're here and you're not a Jesus person, you're not a Bible person, you are probably very much second-guessing making the decision to become one. But again, I think this is just a good idea. It's not Christian per se. Again, science bears this out. Seeing your money as a tool makes you happier. Your generosity matters. And your generosity matters if you're a Jesus person. You would believe this. Your generosity matters, and I think this is Jesus' point, beyond this life. But he's still not done with the story, and Jesus kind of adds this bit. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Jesus, I think, is saying that God's chief competitor for your heart is your wealth, your stuff, and the security that it represents. And when you begin to view your money and your stuff the way that Jesus views it, what happens is your whole heart is now free to serve Jesus. Remember, giving isn't just a how can I help, it's a how can I blow my faith up. And the more we grow the little generosity corner of our heart, the more Jesus sort of can flood that space and grow us. I think Jesus is saying your money's a tool, your money's a test, but I also think he's saying your money's a trademark. We know what a trademark is. It's this device that communicates ownership. How you spend and how you use your possessions, your money, is a reflection, it's an indicator of whose you truly are. What you do with what you have indicates whose you are. Your money's a tool, it's a test, it's a trademark, and here's how Jesus wraps it all up. The Pharisees, these are religious leaders of Jesus' day, a sect of religious leaders. There was a lot of different sort of versions of Judaism in Jesus' day. The Pharisees, though, who loved money, heard all of this and were sneering at Jesus. So Jesus said to them, you are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others, but God knows your hearts. What people value highly is detestable in God's sight. Jesus says, listen, you're good at talking yourself out of generosity. And I think it's not just the Pharisees. I think we are in that club too. And Jesus said, listen, but don't lie to yourself. If you just aren't there and you don't want to be generous, just be honest about that. You're just not there. You haven't taken that step yet. Okay. But Jesus is saying, don't fool yourself. Generosity is not a financial issue. Generosity actually has virtually nothing to do with your finances. Generosity has everything to do with your heart. And here's how I know this. Because I know rich people who are generous, and I know rich people who are not generous. I know middle-class people who are generous, And I know middle-class people who are not generous. I know people living below the poverty line that are generous, and I know people living below the poverty line who are not generous. Do you know who's generous? Generous people are generous. That's who's generous. The issue is never what you have or don't have. The issue's always been, and this is Jesus' point, your heart. Generosity isn't born out of our abundance. It's born out of trust. You're generous when you believe Jesus is who he says he is, and that the life he's inviting you to live actually is the best way to live, and the path towards you unlocking your potential as a human. And we can justify all day long, but at the end of the day, your wealth is a tool that can, if you choose for it to be so, a tool that changes other people's lives. Your money is a test. God, I think, is watching what we do with our little bit. And it's a trademark. What we do with our little bit, I think, determines whose we truly are. You okay? I mean, money talks, those are the best. Now listen, always when we talk about money around here, we always want to say, this isn't just what we want from you. I know some of you grew up in environments where it's just like, well, I'm not a Christian because all the church wants from me is my money. That's not the case at all. It is something that we want for you. And it is something that if this space, we've brought up so many different ways to kind of understand the collective that is Neighborhood Church, right? We've talked about it as a faith community. We've talked about it as an extended spiritual family. Last week, we talked about it as this body, and we're all sort of individual members, but our health determines really the health of the body. I mean, just like if you have a part of your body that's unhealthy, sort of messes up everything else, right? And you're just not feeling great, right? I mean, so there is this sense that, yes, when we all collectively practice generosity, it unlocks our potential as a community and we can have more impact in the community. Of course, yes, of course. But remember, we're asking two questions. How can I grow? Or how can I help, right? How can I help the body, this family, this community? But also, how can I grow? And this is what I want for you. When we commit to practicing generosity, there's almost nothing else that grows your faith faster and bigger than taking that step into generosity. And it's what I want for you. And remember, we've said there's 4 practices through all of this. And Ryan, we just real quick to recap the whole series, we said there's 4 practices that answer the questions, how can I help and how can I grow? And the first one was living beyond yourself. Right? And we said the practice that we do as a community that gives you the opportunity to practice living beyond yourself as an individual, as a family, is we partner with these local nonprofits, monthly 4 projects, right? This month we've said we're partnering with Sleep in Heavenly Peace. They make beds for kids that don't have beds, but they need bedding. And if you remember a few weeks ago, I said, I want you to go to Target and buy a bed in a bag or pillows or whatever and come back, so much so that Sleep in Heavenly Peace won't need bedding for 5 years. Before this morning, we were at 4 years. So give yourselves a hand. Pretty cool. And we thought nothing was going to come in today. I mean, Shelly has been taking wagons full over there. So I think we'll hit the 5-year mark. Then the week after that, we said the next practice is helping out. We said we have a great reputation for Visalia. Everybody loves us. But how do we stay healthy at home? How do we make sure our reputation in the community and our health here at home are aligned? Well, it's when we all decide that we're just going to help out and we're going to grab a personal ministry. And we're going to help our family right here back at home. And more than 300 of you said yes to that. Pretty cool. And then last week, we just talked about staying connected and that this is a big place and you need to be a part of a community that you're known and your story's known and you have friends, right? I mean, I love you all, but I'm not all of your friends. I don't know some of your names and I don't know your story, but Christianity is a we faith, not a me faith. You can't just come and sit here on a Sunday. I mean, you can, but Man, that's not what I want for you. Man, more than 300 of you are signed up for groups, and many more of you have your own tribes already, and that's great. And we believe in the value of staying connected, so we offer environments. So you don't have to be in one of our environments, but I just need you in one of those so that your faith can blow up. And then this morning, and you'll notice every week, if you signed up for something, we gave you something, because we're not below bribing. We'll do it all day long. And this week is the practice of generosity. I know it's uncomfortable to talk about, but man, Jesus talked about it so much. We have to talk about it. We have to bring it up. It's just one of those things that, yes, it's one of the things that sort of unlocks our potential, and it's one of those things that more than anything unlocks your potential. And so on your seats, I mean, it's been funny. Last service anyway, I was like, okay, pick up your cards. And all the other weeks, people were like, yeah. And this week, everyone was like, what card? I don't know what card it is. Right? And so here's the thing. I mean, these are just ways to practice generosity. And here's the thing, and I'll say this. Yes, you can give money to any organization you want. I mean, yes. But I personally believe in the local church. And I'll tell you why I believe in the local church, because it's the one organization that's going to outlive you, it's going to outlast you, and it's going to out-impact you. I keep going back to Bob and Lucille Williams, who 73 years ago, kids were walking home to and from school cussing, and they heard it. And in 1948, that bugged them. And now I'm like, which kid doesn't know? Right, and so they started this little cupcake ministry and volleyball, and they just talked about Jesus, and that's what birthed Neighborhood Church. Bob and Lucille are past now, but I had the opportunity to meet them. When I told them that what they started all of those years ago out of their own generosity had become this thing that's reaching thousands, and people are watching what we do here all over like 90 different countries. I mean, they wept. And one day, 73 years from now, there's going to be a pastor up there. I believe this. If we say, yes, and the return on investment you get with the local church, it's worth it. There's going to be a pastor 73 years from now. Maybe it'll be a new stage, but, and they're going to talk about this group of people who navigated the most disruptive event to hit the American church in more than a century, how they navigated and thrived through it, and that those people 73 years from now are sitting in church because of that group of people. That's how much I believe in investing in a local church. And if you don't feel like you can trust Neighborhood Church as your local church to invest in, go find one that can. Really. I mean, I believe in a local church that much, because there's nothing like it in the world, and Jesus is the hope of the world, and we are the physical extension of that hope. And so on your cards. Sorry, that was a rant. It's pretty simple. Find where you are. And my challenge to you is just take a step. For some of you, you've never invested. Well, actually, okay, I need to shut up, but generosity is different than giving the change in your pocket. Here's how I define generosity. It's the premeditated, calculated, designated emancipation of personal financial assets. That's pretty particular, yes? Here's what we mean by that. It's premeditated, right? You have a plan. Because so many of you had a plan, and we weren't meeting, so there was no boxes in the back of the wall, that's why we're still alive today. That's why Neighborhood Church still exists, because so many of you understood that generosity was premeditated and calculated. So many of you just give consistently. Right? You already know how much you're going to give. It's designated. You've already pre-decided where it's going to go. And emancipation is a posture, right? I just have an open hand. It's not my stuff anyway. This is just a tool. I'm just managing it. And so here's where this card comes in. Here's my challenge for you. The opportunity I think you have to, how can I help? And how can you blow your faith up? Maybe for some of you, I mean, listen, we are predictably great every week. You can invite your friends and know, music, everything's going to be good. Everything's going to be humming. Because so many of you predictably give. And we just know. So maybe for you, that's a first-time thing. Maybe for you, you just want to go, well, I kind of drop in here and there, so I just want to move to consistent. Maybe for others of you, you want to do the percentage thing. I'm going to give 1%. I'm going to give 2%. Or I already give 2%. I want to give 2.5% or 3%. You just want to grow. And then for some of you, extravagant, we're going to do 10% or more than 10%. And then, again, I'm not kidding about this is what I want for you. Maybe for some of you, you're just upside down. You're drowning in $100,000 of credit card debt or whatever it is. We have a great little financial kind of course, seminar that's 6 weeks long that's called I Was Broke, Now I'm Not. And man, if you want to sign up for that. So here's the thing. Listen, I grew up Mormon and in the Mormon church, and I'm not knocking the Mormon church at all. I have so many great memories and experiences from there, but you go meet with the bishop, and you better bring your W-2. I mean, they ask. If you want that temple recommend card, they want to know, right? And so what you're going to do is you're going to check the box, and then you'll go to the reset tent that's right out here, and then they'll ask for your W-2s, and then, no, we don't care. I don't know. I don't look. I don't do any of that. This is so just you and just your desire to grow. But you pick one, and you just hand it in, and you get a free salsa. Now, you could do that and get a free salsa thing and then not. And that's definitely between you and Jesus. So, but I will say, it's 4-Visalia salsa, by the way. You've heard of holy water? Holy salsa. So, okay, I'm so late. So also you can just kind of do the QR code if you're I don't talk to people or whatever your deal is. So, but together, I think we can have, there's more of us. More of us together, we can do more. And more of you growing, we can do more. So that's it. That's the vision. That's what I hope for you. That's what I hope for us. Sound okay? Yeah? All right. Can I pray? And then we'll get out of here. Jesus, thanks. Thanks so much for this morning. And we don't necessarily love that you talked about our stuff so much, to the point that over the last 2,000 years, we've just made heaven the topic instead of our money. But I'm just glad for the reminder that our stuff matters. It matters here, and it matters in eternity. And help us to be people. Help us to be a community of people, a family of people, a body of people who understand that our stuff is a tool, it's a test, and it's a trademark, letting people know whose we are. Jesus, we love you, and it's in your name we pray. Amen. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Forrest. It's been great to hang out with you all this morning. Just a couple of reminders before we head out of here. First thing, if you're here this morning and you just need someone to come alongside you in prayer, our prayer team is going to be over here to the right of the stage. They'd love to pray for you this morning. Also, if you're new with us here at Neighborhood, we would love to say hello to you and give you a Discover and See box that has all kinds of fun things about Neighborhood, how to get connected, cool swag stuff. Would love to say hello to you at the Next Lounge on the patio. And last thing, don't forget to grab those Living Generously cards, take them out to the reset tent, grab yourself your bowl of salsa. Have an awesome week.